Okay. Hello everyone, my name is Gianluca Grimalda. I'm what is called an experimental economist. So I did my PhD in economics, and after my PhD I decided to do experiments with people. So this is part of what is called now behavioral economics. So the idea is trying to study and understand human behavior rather than using axioms about how people should behave, going out and see how people actually behave, looking at their perhaps biases and cognitive limitations, and try to rationalize these into models of behavior. So I mean, this sounds very, very abstract, but in practice what I do is actually I play games with people. So I go out and I give people money, and I see what they do with this money. So normally in standard experiments they could either keep the money for themselves or share the money with the group at a cost for themselves, and this is our measure of self-interest or concern for the group. So this is pretty much what I do. I am a lead author, so I'm contributing to the chapter on social justice and well-being. So I think that's a great topic for me. It interests me a lot, and so we have just set the basis for the work for the next couple of years. Everyone's hope is that this project has some social impact, and I mean, perhaps it sounds too idealistic, but I think for every researcher, the hope is really that what we do doesn't stay confined in a university room, but it goes out and puts a little grain of sand to change the world. So I think that is really what we hope for, that it has some impact with policymakers, with social movements, and perhaps with the public as a whole. I have two main research interests, one dealing with cooperation, understanding the basis of cooperation, and the other with inequality. I think one piece of research that might have some relevance was one that I carried out some years ago. The goal was to study the relationship between globalization and cooperation. So the very general research question was, does globalization make us more cooperative or not? And there are sort of many things that are mentioned about globalization. And so we tried to really go out and, first of all, measure what we call the individual level of large-scale interconnectedness, so how much globalized, if you like, people are, using several questions involving how often they use internet, email, social media, and at which scale, at the local, national, or global scale. So we have other items tapping on the economic globalization, and then the social and the political globalization. And so we came up with an index of how globalized an individual are. And then we observed experimentally the propensity to cooperate at the local, national, and global level. And also we have measures of social identity, so how much people feel identified with the local, national, and global community. And I mean, I always try to be very agnostic when I start a research project, so I try to have a clear theories, but I'm not try to put much weight on one rather than the other theory. But I would say that the results were pretty straightforward. So the more globalized a person is, and the more cooperative this person is. And so also we found the same association at the global level. So the more a country is globalized, the more cooperative people living in that country are. We ran this research in 6 countries, which were United States, Italy, Russian Federation, Argentina, South Africa, and Iran. And when we first looked at the data, we were just stuck, because we couldn't expect this very, very clear correlation between the level of country-level globalization and the level of cooperation. So I think this is, of course, as every piece of research, it doesn't give us the whole truth, so more research will be needed. But I think what this research clearly suggests is that we don't have to fear globalization, at least in terms of the contacts, economic contacts, social contacts, and political contacts that a person, cultural contacts as well, that a person can develop. We think that these might really have a formative effect on people's identification with the communities. What we also find is that the more a person is globalized, the more this person will cooperate also at the local level. Many times when we think of globalization, we tend to think that, okay, if you become more globalized, you tend to forget your local and national attachment. But we find that this is not the case. So this is very interesting, I think. And, but on the other hand, we find also that people who are more attached at the local level are the happiest of the lot. So as usual, I mean, there are a lot of different stories, so reality is not black and white. There are a lot of gray areas in it. I think the biggest problem, I mean, not just in my field, but I think in many fields, has to do with climate change and more generally global governance. I'm very sensitive to environmental issues, and yeah, as a matter of fact, I came here from northern Germany, traveling by train and coach in order to save on my carbon footprint. And I think the scientific evidence that we have clearly points to basically to the fact that we are slowly, perhaps not so slowly, going towards an iceberg. And there seems to be very little social awareness of that, probably because the economic interests are for people keeping on consuming and being happy with their social media without really concerning too much about the future. And this, I think, is really, really scary. And I think what we observe in Europe, but in general, I think at the global level, is that there is a decrease in trust in European institutions and also in global institutions. And I think we have, even from the side of social movements, we have an emphasis on the local aspect, which is, I think, which is good. But I think it has to be combined with a greater awareness of the need to really have global institutions to tackle global problems. Otherwise, I think it's really, really difficult to come up with a feasible solution. A change I'd like to see in society is probably an elected United Nations. So I would really like democracy to be extended to the United Nations, which is one of the largest and one of the most important global institutions. And yeah, I don't know if this will happen in my lifetime, but I would really like to see this happening. Yeah. Okay, my final remark has to do with the idea of progress. I think we have done an amazing amount of progress as humanity in the last 200 years, in the last millennium. Just consider that, you know, during feudal times, people, in the standard life of a person would be to work 12 hours, more or less, every day on the fields. 100 years ago, the average working week for a worker was 72 hours. So we have had an amazing progress. And I think I mean, perhaps it sounds a little bit of a cliche, but I would really like to finish with some optimism, a message of hope, because I think we tend to give a very bleak, as academics, but I think in general as people, we tended to have a very bleak view of over the present. So we tended to have this idea that the past was our golden age, that things in the past were better than how they are now. And that is not the case, simply stated. So we are much, much better under an awful set of circumstances and indicators. This does not mean that we have to strive for the better. Of course, we must. But I would really like to say that we don't need to have this pessimistic and bleak view over current reality, especially if we happen to live in the Western world. We are immensely privileged to be free to move, to have the material resources, but also the political freedom to move around the world. And I've traveled a lot. I think in my life I have visited probably about 40 countries, and I try to, as much as possible, to meet, to interact with the people I meet on the way. And when I say that, I don't know, I recently traveled from Hong Kong to Europe by train, and so many people have asked me to tell them something about what I see. They asked me to show them photographs of Europe, and when I show photographs of Milan or Paris or London, they are enchanted, of course. And what they tell me is that I'm never going to see Europe. I'm never going to leave my country because I don't have money, or because my country is not going to give me a visa. And so this is, I think, one obvious instance of inequality. It's not economic inequality, it's really inequality with freedom. And so I would like to say as a final remark that especially in the north, we have to be aware of the immense privilege that we have in conducting the life that we do. And I think our utmost concern should really be for global inequality rather than for national or local level inequality. Of course, every kind of social injustice is relevant, but I think in general people tend to be so overly concerned without what happens in their local community. They compare their standard of living with the people living in their close social space. I really hope that we have a much broader view of what the real problems are around the world.